Hank Schrader isn't just a cop.
Told you, you can call my...
He's a force in a polo shirt. He's the guy who could crack jokes about minerals during the day and kick down your door at night. Breaking Bad gave us a lot of determined characters, but Hank, he's the top lawman, loud sure, but relentless. Nonetheless, you don't just root for him, you root for how much he refuses to quit. Here are reasons why Hank is most terrifying cop in TV series history. 1. The Heisenberg revelation. The greatest breakthrough in DEA history happened in a bathroom. During a family cookout, Hank slipped away to use the restroom. While glancing around for something to read, he picked up a copy of Leaves of Grass. Because Hank's detective memory is genuinely elite, he instantly recalled the WW inscription from Gale Boetticher's notebook. And right there in that moment, it all clicked. The criminal genius he had been hunting for years was his own brother-in-law sitting at the same dinner table. He left the house pretending to feel sick, but rest was the last thing on his mind. He spent the entire night pulling every evidence box from the past 2 years, finally seeing that Walt was the thread connecting Gale, Jesse, and the blue meth. Walter eventually noticed his book was gone. After connecting the dots to Hank's sudden discomfort and spotting a tracker on his own car, he realized Hank had figured it out. Walt decided to confront him directly. But after a few seconds of small talk, Hank shut the garage door and drove his fist straight into Walt's face. But Hank understood he still needed hard evidence to actually bring Walt down in court. His big break arrived when Jesse completely fell apart and attempted to burn Walt's house to the ground. Hank stopped him just in time and flipped his former target into his most important witness. A good witness for me will go better for you. After sitting through Walt's desperate voicemails, Hank decided to use Jesse as live bait. Jesse, I'm going to be at Civic Plaza tomorrow at noon. I hope you'll give me the chance to explain myself, talk through everything once and for all. Hank wired Jesse up and sent him in. But when Jesse arrived and spotted a hard-looking guy in a leather jacket scanning the crowd, he assumed it was a hitman called Walt from a payphone and walked away. The plan collapsed. But Jesse wasn't done thinking. To get him, there's another way. Jesse pushed the idea of going after Walt's buried money instead. Hank used his interrogation skills to convince Walt's bodyguard Huel that Walt was on a killing spree, even using a staged photo of a supposedly dead Jesse to pressure him into revealing that Walt had rented a van to move 7 barrels of cash. Hank tracked down the rental agency only to hit a wall. Had to go at the rental place. That have a GPS? No GPS. Nope. They used to have GPS until about 6 months ago. The ACLU or somebody sued him, they get rid of it. Most detectives would have packed up and gone home. But Hank's brain found a loophole nobody else would have thought of. Since Walt hadn't rented the van himself, he had no way of knowing it had no tracker. So Hank decided to weaponize Walt's own paranoia. He got a plastic barrel, stuffed it with cash, photographed it, and sent it straight to Walter. Got my photo? That barrel look familiar? 'Cause I just found 6 more exactly like it. Jesse's call sealed it, threatening to burn every last cent. The trap worked perfectly. A panicked Walter drove straight out to the desert and led Hank and Gomez directly to his buried millions. Walter White, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. After years of being played, manipulated, and sabotaged at every turn, Hank finally snapped the cuffs on Heisenberg. The victory didn't last long, though. Jack's crew showed up and a brutal shootout erupted in the desert. Gomez was killed. Hank took a bullet to the leg. With an empty gun and no backup on the way, he faced the end, the same way he faced everything else. My name is ASAC Schrader, and you can go I am sick yourself. Even when Walt begged Jack to let him live and threw $80 million on the table, Hank already knew how it was going to end. You're the smartest guy I ever met, and you're too stupid to see. He made up his mind 10 minutes ago. Hank died as the most dedicated detective the show ever gave us. He had spent years connecting every single dot, and in the end, he was right about all of it. 2. 1 minute to survive. After the brutal beating he put on Jesse, Hank stood up at the DEA office and owned what he had done. A SAC Merkert had no choice but to strip him of everything. As of this moment, you're suspended without pay. I have to ask you to hand over your badge and your gun. For the first time in years, Hank was completely exposed. But when he stopped at a shopping center to grab flowers for Marie, he got an anonymous call that froze everything. 2 men are coming to kill you. Come again. We're approaching your car. You have 1 minute. Hank reached for his sidearm out of pure reflex before remembering he had nothing. Then he saw Lionel in his rearview mirror and Marco closing in from the side with an axe. Hank threw the car into reverse and slammed it straight into Lionel, crushing him between 2 vehicles. The impact shattered Lionel's spine and sent his gun skidding into Hank's car. Marco kept firing and bullets punched through the SUV as Hank dropped low for cover. Following the blood trail, Marco stalked him through the lot. Hank tried everything, but the bullets did nothing against Marco's bulletproof vest. He emptied the whole clip, and Marco kept coming, hitting him twice before deciding he wanted the kill done the old way. He turned back to his car, grabbed the silver axe, and dragged it slowly across the pavement as he moved in for the finish. But while Marco was walking back, Hank spotted a bullet Marco had dropped on the ground. With shaking hands, he loaded it into the chamber just as Marco raised the axe above his head. Hank pulled the trigger and took his head clean off. Lionel survived the attack and was rushed to the hospital, but was finished off shortly after by Mike. This scene was the purest proof of how deeply trained Hank really was. Sure, Gus tipped him off, but that was literally 60 seconds before 2 of the most dangerous killers in the show came for him. No gun, no plan, no backup, no cover, and he still walked away. 3. Connecting Gale. Gus. After Jesse shot Gale at the end of season 3, Hank was handed the murder file to go through while he recovered at home. At first, he was ready to close it out. He even told Walt Jr. that Gale was the mastermind he had been looking for all along. But during a family dinner, a drunk and irritated Walter couldn't stomach watching someone else take credit for his genius. There was no reasoning, no deductions in those pages. So, to my eye, all this brilliance looks like nothing more than just simple rote copying, probably of someone else's work. That one comment flipped a switch. The next morning, Hank went back through Gale's records and caught something so small that every other agent had walked right past it: a Los Pollos Hermanos napkin. "Since when do vegans eat fried chicken?" Scrawled on the back was a serial number. After running it down, Hank discovered it was a component for a heavy-duty industrial air filtration unit, a $300,000 piece of equipment. He figured out that this machine was built exactly for the largest meth operation north of the border and traced the manufacturer back to a company called Madrigal, which had a financial stake in Los Pollos Hermanos. Later, Hank sat down with Gomez and ASAC Merkert at the DEA office and laid it out. There is a high-volume HEPA industrial air filtration system. It's a $300,000 gadget. Be perfect for a pharmaceutical plant or a microchip factory, or maybe the biggest meth lab north of the border. Then he went further and drew the line straight to the restaurant. What's a vegan doing in a fried chicken joint? Maybe he's meeting somebody. Like, who? This guy. As usual, Gomez and Merkert weren't buying it. Gus was a recognized friend of law enforcement, and Hank seemed like he was stretching. But he had kept his best card face down the whole time. What are Gustavo Fring's fingerprints doing in Gale Boetticher's apartment? Hank dropped the report on the table with a smirk. The evidence was impossible to argue with, and the DEA had no choice but to bring Gus Fring in for a formal sit-down. The interrogation and the GPS play. Relentless digging finally forced the Albuquerque police to bring Gus Fring into an official interrogation. Gus walked in, cool and composed, facing a room full of senior agents, including ASAC Merkert and Sergeant Tim Roberts. When pressed about his fingerprints turning up at a murder scene, Gus had a perfectly rehearsed answer waiting. 15 years ago, I established a chemistry scholarship at UNM. He described how Gale later approached him at Los Pollos Hermanos about a research project and invited him to dinner to talk about funding. The rest of the room was practically ready to apologize, but Hank wasn't close to finished. He had been digging into Gus's background and found something that nobody could explain. There was no record of Gustavo Fring ever existing in Chile. Is Gustavo Fring your real name? Is it my real name? I know you're a Chilean national, but there are no records of you ever living there, which I find, strange. Gus blamed the gap on the Pinochet regime's notoriously sloppy record-keeping. By the time the room cleared out, Gus had successfully worked almost everyone in it. I was definitely curious when his prints showed up at Boetticher's apartment, but for me, the scholarship thing explains it. I think he even convinced me a little. Hank knew he was lying. Rather than walking away, he later tricked Walt into driving him over to Los Pollos Hermanos. Well, I can't prove it, mind you, but I suspect the man's a drug dealer. Yeah, methamphetamine. Then Hank asked Walt for one small favor that sent him into a quiet panic. I need a favor. See that Volvo station wagon? The guy drives a 10-year-old Volvo. It's brilliant. What I need you to do is stick this on it. Hank sat in the car, watching as Walt walked toward the Volvo, pretending to tie his shoe while planting the tracker. What Hank didn't know was that Gus had already encouraged Walt to go through with it and play along. I didn't do it. See, I didn't do it. Do it. May I help you with your order? When Hank eventually pulled the tracker and reviewed the data, the results were almost laughably boring. The log showed Gus traveling the same 2 points every single day without exception. All right, baby, let's see what we got. What the hell? Look at this. Bump, 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 bump. That's work. That's home. That's work. That's home. Like this guy has 2 places every day all week. It's unbelievable. The man doesn't even stop for groceries. But this is where Hank's instincts separated him from everyone else. Any other cop would have looked at that data and felt embarrassed for ever doubting such a clean, predictable citizen. But Hank spotted the problem immediately. Gus owned 13 other restaurant locations, yet the tracker showed he never visited a single one of them. He realized Gus was deliberately running a fixed route because he already knew someone was watching him. Down. The blue meth had gone quiet for a stretch, but everything shifted when Jesse pulled into a gas station and realized he was flat broke. He traded a small bag of blue meth to the cashier, Kara, for gas and cigarettes. That one careless move put the product right back on the DEA's radar. Hank was literally at the airport about to board a flight to El Paso for his big promotion when his phone rang with a tip about a new blue meth sighting. The stuff this guy had was blue. Are you sure about that? He ditched the flight on the spot and went straight to the scene where he questioned a user and picked up a detail that the dealer's name might start with M. Even when Gomez pushed back and suggested it was probably a knockoff or a leftover batch, Hank shut it down. This stuff could be a knockoff or leftover from an older cook. How do you know Heisenberg's gearing up again? He started working through every name starting with M and eventually landed at the gas station where he tracked down Kara. After pressing her for answers, he finally had something worth chasing. He looked pretty normal, white. I think his hair was lightish brown. He had really blue eyes. Really, really blue. Jesse is so handsome. How do you remember anything else? But then she dropped one small detail that changed the entire direction of the case. He drove an RV. The shop's camera was busted, but Hank noticed an ATM sitting outside with its own lens pointed at the lot. Y'all, this is insane. Bingo. Later, called into ASAC Merkert's office to explain why he had blown off El Paso, Hank put on a masterclass. By studying the ATM footage, he had noticed something off about the RV's riding height. Typical Class C motorhome is going to carry at least 5,000 pounds of interior fixtures. Okay, we're talking appliances, furniture, built-ins, 5,000 pounds, at least. No way, no how this thing is carrying that kind of weight. This thing has been cleared out and stripped down to its tires and chassis. He used this to prove Heisenberg was cooking in a mobile lab and told Merkert he wasn't leaving Albuquerque until he had the man behind the blue meth. Hank buried himself in it from that point forward, and it wasn't long before a list of 29 RVs led him straight to the junkyard showdown he had been building toward. 6. The junkyard standoff. After crossing every single RV off his list, Hank still refused to walk away. He asked his assistant to run one final DMV check because his gut told him there was still a lead sitting out there untouched. The hunch paid off when they surfaced a 1986 Fleetwood Bounder. Your hunch was right. One more RV. DMV said the registration wasn't renewed, but then they realized it was never filed as non-operation or destroyed. Hank followed the thread to the home of Mrs. Ortega, Combo's mother. Inside Combo's old bedroom, he found a photo of him standing next to Jesse, and that was all the confirmation he needed. He started tailing Jesse from a distance, watching him meet up with Badger and Skinny Pete. Small world, old Kirky. While sitting on the stakeout, Marie suggested he call Walt to fish for information on Jesse's habits. In a moment of deep irony, Hank rang the exact man he was hunting and asked him casually about the RV. Do you remember if this Pinkman kid ever had an RV? Why? Well, it's a long story, but I'm personally of the opinion that he's moved on from weed and graduated to selling crystal meth. The call sent Walt into a full panic, and he sprinted to the junkyard to destroy the evidence. But there was a problem. Hey, what about Jesse? What about him? Since Badger actually gave a damn about his friend, he called Jesse to warn him the RV was about to be crushed. Without thinking, Jesse tore off to the junkyard and unknowingly walked Hank straight to the door. When Hank arrived, he found the RV with Walt and Jesse barricaded inside. He was seconds from prying it open when Joe, the junkyard owner, stepped in, demanding a warrant. This is a domicile, a residence. Probable cause needs to be readily apparent. Hank didn't have one yet, but his sharp eye found probable cause hiding right in the open, bullet holes covered over with duct tape on the door. Then from inside, Jesse unleashed the iconic line. This is my own private domicile, and I will not be harassed, bitch. Hank was inches from the biggest arrest of his career. Walt knew they needed an escape, so he called Saul, who had his assistant Francesca dial Hank's cell. Sorry to inform you that your wife has been in an automobile accident. She's being airlifted to Los Ranchos Medical Center and should be arriving there shortly. Hank flew to the hospital in a panic, only to find out the whole thing was fabricated. But between the stress and the trauma already building up inside him, the trick completely broke something loose. He drove to Jesse's house and beat him unconscious. You got my cell phone number. You know my wife's name. How'd you do it? Talk. Who are you working with? He only stopped when he saw what he had actually done, leaving Jesse in the hospital with a broken face, internal bleeding, and both eyes swollen completely shut. 7. The chicken farm and the laundry. After the GPS tracker painted a picture of Gus living the most boring and law-abiding life imaginable, Hank refused to accept it and concluded that the whole operation had to be running out of a secure location tied to the business network. one that didn't need Gus physically present every day. Hank had spent weeks watching the Los Pollos Hermanos chicken farm. But when that dried up after Walt quietly tipped Gus off, he asked Walt for another ride. And while Walt assumed they were heading back to the farm, Hank suddenly redirected. "Take a right here. I thought we were going to the chicken farm straight ahead." "Yeah, there's this industrial laundry I want to check out." Walt immediately tried to talk him out of it, calling it a long shot and a weak lead. "Sounds like a real shot in the dark there. I mean, you said it yourself, this is such a big conglomerate. They must own all kinds of businesses. It just sounds kind of thin." But Hank had done the work and connected every piece. He had linked Gale's chemistry background, the expensive air filters, and the corporate structure of Madrigal Electromotive. Madrigal Electromotive also owns a subsidiary. A chemist who was in possession of hand-drawn plans for a meth superlab was visited by none other than Gus Fring. As they got close to the building, Hank was literally seconds from walking up to the entrance of the hidden superlab. "There it is. Right up there. Just turn in there. Slow down. Just, you've got to turn in there." Hank told Walt to flip around and go back, but Walt was so terrified of Hank approaching that entrance that he deliberately steered into oncoming traffic, causing a serious crash just to shut the investigation down. It stands as one of the most impressive stretches of detective reasoning in the entire series. Even sidelined by injury and deep in his minerals phase, Hank successfully located the most tightly hidden meth lab in North America using nothing but paper trails, logic, and instinct. The only reason he came up short that day was that Walt tried to kill them both to keep the secret buried. 8. Dispatching Gomez to the laundry after the crash left Hank stuck in a neck brace and unable to return to the laundry in person. He still knew the building was hiding something and turned to his most reliable asset, his partner Steve Gomez. Knowing Gomez would push back, Hank worked a clever combination of guilt and professional pride to get him through that door without a warrant. Now, if we even had a shred of proof, isn't that what you get paid to go get? Remember that laundry I told you about? "I'd start there. Perfect spot for a meth lab," Gomez grudgingly agreed. To get access without paperwork, he spun a story about a chef whose clothes may have been contaminated with heroin residue. "Listen, you know what? I had to check on my boss and he's out of town, and I can't promise I'll reach him anytime soon either. So I'll have to go get a warrant and we'll do it with 20 agents poking around. Be less trouble if it was just us two." The manager, Dennis, eventually waved them in to avoid the headache. Gomez walked through the facility, snapping photos and running a drug detection dog across the floor. At one point, Gomez and the dog were standing directly over the concealed entrance to the underground lab. But because of the advanced filtration system, the dog picked up absolutely nothing. Gomez left with empty hands. But when he brought the photos back to Hank, Hank spotted a technical detail that an entire team of field agents had completely missed. The electrical panel was wrong for the building. This panel, if I'm reading it correctly, is 7,200 amp service. This place has 2 of them. That's a whole lot of juice, brother. A laundry this size typically has maybe half that. So what's with the extra panel? Hank realized the facility was drawing enormous amounts of power, far beyond what washing clothes could ever require. It was the final confirmation that something massive was hidden behind those walls. But Hank never got to run the bust he had mapped out because Gus Fring was killed in an explosion shortly after, leaving the DEA buried under a mountain of evidence. 9. Locating the junkyard through Gonzo. While the rest of the DEA had their eyes on street-level activity, Hank and Gomez were locked onto cartel boss Tuco Salamanca. The trail brought them to a junkyard in the middle of the night where they found a grim scene. 2 bodies, no does, beaten to death, and Gonzo, found pinned beneath a collapsed tower of crushed cars. While the working assumption was a straightforward double murder, Hank's instincts fired instantly. The positioning of the stack suggested Gonzo had been moving the body when the pile shifted. He clocked the angle of Gonzo's arm and understood immediately what had happened. Gonzo had come back alone to pull his friend out and give him a proper burial, but the unstable wreckage gave way and came down on him, crushed his arm, pinned him here, and he bled out. It was a critical break because it gave the DEA a direct link tying Tuco to the scene and triggered the warehouse raid. Since Tuco had no way of knowing Gonzo's death was an accident, he assumed betrayal and convinced himself Gonzo had turned informant. That paranoia was the exact reason Tuco grabbed Walt and Jesse, believing they were the only cooks he could still trust. And honestly, maybe he just wanted to take them somewhere nice. What's so wrong with that? When Walt went missing the following morning, Hank used those same razor-sharp instincts to chase down a car that walked him right back into Tuco's path. 10. The LoJack lead. When Walt vanished without explanation, Hank came by the house and heard a rumor through Marie that Walt might have been buying marijuana from a former student named Jesse Pinkman. Hank tracked down Jesse's mother and learned that Jesse drove a flashy red Monte Carlo lowrider. That detail sparked an idea immediately. He knew cars like that often came fitted with LoJack tracking systems. Hey, listen, you do me a solid and check out an '89 Chevy Monte Carlo registered to one Jesse Pinkman. Specifically, I want to know if the car has got a LoJack. The signal walked him straight to a shack sitting in the middle of the desert where he expected to find Jesse. Instead, Hank walked directly into the DEA's most wanted Tuco Salamanca. Jesse Pinkman, hard man to find. After taking Tuco down in a legendary shootout, Hank still wasn't satisfied and stayed convinced that Jesse had been at the scene. Following a tip set up through Badger, the DEA raided a motel to pull Jesse and Wendy in for questioning. I think you know who Tuco Salamanca was. I think her car was there because you were there. Even when Gomez told him they had to let it go for lack of evidence, Hank had one last move. He gave Jesse his most knowing smile and walked Tuco's uncle, Hector Salamanca, in to identify him. This guy right here, he was at your house, right? Was he doing business with your nephew Tuco? Even though Hector refused to say a word, it was a great scene, and the way Hank pieced together a warehouse theft, a missing brother-in-law, and a cartel kingpin through a single car tracker was some of the sharpest detective work the show ever put on screen. Seeing through the wrong arrest. Tuco was gone. Jesse started moving product with Badger, Skinny Pete, and Combo. Things fell apart fast when Badger got pinched, selling to an undercover officer. To save himself, Badger offered to hand over the infamous Heisenberg. When Hank asked for a physical description, Badger kept it short. Dude's balder than you. To protect Walt, Saul hired a career criminal named Jimmy In-N-Out to step in and take the collar. The DEA organized a major sting at a park, but the whole thing nearly unraveled when Badger sat down on the wrong bench. Walt showed up at exactly the right moment and stalled Hank with small talk long enough for Jesse to slip over and steer Badger to the correct spot. Once Badger moved, the DEA closed in and took Jimmy down. On paper, the case was wrapped. The rest of the department was ready to celebrate. But Hank's gut told him immediately that something was off. He took one look at Jimmy and knew this man was not the genius he had been chasing. A few episodes later, when Combo was killed, rest in peace, the blue meth disappeared entirely from Albuquerque. While Gomez argued the case was closed with Jimmy in custody, Hank refused to accept it. That the purest, most professional grade of meth we've ever come across is being slung by the likes of that. The blue stuffs vanished from town. Hank started reaching out to departments across other states and confirmed that the blue meth hadn't disappeared at all. It had simply moved. I say Heisenberg's still out there. I say he's going regional. Oh, he's still right here in town. While the rest of the DEA was ready to move on, one phone call was about to prove that Hank's regional theory was completely correct. 12 chased the money to Mike. After Hank's death, the DEA assumed the investigation was finished, but Hank understood that an empire that size doesn't vanish without leaving a trail. While sifting through the wreckage of the super lab, he uncovered a hidden list of names and bank accounts. Hank's detective brain kicked in immediately when he realized Gus had been running a hazard pay arrangement to keep his imprisoned employees quiet and loyal, and it led him straight to Michael Ehrmantraut. What else did you do for Fring? He must have needed help running that drug empire of his. No. But Mike kept playing the confused old man, and since he wasn't officially under arrest, he knew he could stand up and walk out whenever he chose. Forget your handcuffs. I'm confused. Am I under arrest here, or am I not? You are not under arrest currently. Mike stood up and headed for the door, but as he was about to step out, Hank played the card he had been holding back. I suppose we could talk about the $2 million in your granddaughter's name. This is where Hank proved he was operating on a completely different level. He explained that Gus had maintained offshore accounts registered under the names of everyone on his payroll, but one account stood apart from all the others. Anyway, one of the names was Kaylee Ehrmantraut, 10 years old and just cute as a button. $2 million and change we found on deposit for her, way more than anybody else. Maybe it was actually her dear old granddaddy. By surfacing Kaylee's money, Hank demonstrated that Mike wasn't a simple security consultant. He was a senior partner who had pulled in millions from his arrangement with Gus. Hank used that financial connection to get a search warrant on Mike's house. But Mike was sharp enough that the search came up empty, and Hank's boss shut the whole thing down. All this overtime to surveil Michael Ehrmantraut. That's just money that could be better spent elsewhere. But the real detective work came in the next move. Since the manhunt for Mike was closed, Hank shifted focus to Mike's attorney, Dan Waxberger. The DEA caught Dan in the act inside a bank vault, literally loading cash into 9 separate safety deposit boxes for Mike's crew. Once Dan agreed to cooperate, Hank was on the verge of dismantling the last surviving pieces of the Gustavo Fring empire. But a casual walk to his brother-in-law's bathroom was about to turn his entire world upside down. 13. All right, here's the irony. Hank's detective instincts are the very reason this show exists at all. At Walt's 50th birthday gathering, Hank was showing the family a news segment about his most recent lab seizure and soaking up every second of it. I'm proud to say the outstanding professionalism of my fellow agents at the Albuquerque district office resulted in a substantial amount of methamphetamine being taken off the streets. But while Hank was busy taking bows, he had no idea he was handing Walt a business blueprint. Watching all that cash on screen made Walt realize exactly how much money was sitting inside that industry. Hank, how much money is that? It's about 700 grand.